This is My Perspective discussion series, where women talk Budo. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of My Perspective. If you've listened before, you'll know that my name's Cathy, and here's my co-host Fran. Hi, Fran.
Hello.
Hello. And we are both Aikido students of Ismail Hasan Sensei at Aikido of London. And Sensei has been kind enough to join us this evening. Hello, Sensei.
Hi, Cathy. Hi, Fran.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. And how are you?
Very well, thank you. Yes, excited to get stuck into this topic, which today is fear. We're going to be talking about fear, as you said just before we hit record, a nice, cozy, cuddly subject. Fear in Aikido. So is fear necessary? Should you fear your teacher? Where's the line between helpful or unhelpful fear in relation to Aikido? So before we tackle these some of these questions, perhaps Sensei, you'd like to introduce yourself for anyone watching who may not know too much about you.
No problem. Happy to do so. I'm Ismail Hasan, and I teach Cathy and Fran, and I teach them Aikido, obviously, and that goes back a long time, back to the 70s when I began as a teenager. My interest was spiked by Steve Beecham Sensei and Alan Beecham, his brother, and the connection is directly with Chiba Sensei, who eventually became my own direct teacher. The enthusiasm was obvious from the start. The moment I started, I was hooked, and it was pretty self-evident that this was going to go a long way. But of course, I had to take the various steps to do that. But my journey took me from London to Brighton. I actually chose the university to go down there because it had an Aikido dojo. So I had no intention of missing my training whilst trying to get smart at the same time. But around all this time, the name Chiba Sensei kept on popping up, and I found it quite compelling. And most of it was myth, I suppose. And then eventually I got to set my eyes on him in the various summer camps that I attended. These are what they call the British Aikido Federation ones. I attended those. I saw the bigger Aikido world. And finally, after a few years, in the 80s, I finally got to see him. And it didn't take long for me to decide that if I wanted to get to the core of all this, I had to go to his own domain, which in those days was in San Diego, in Southern California. And I saved my money, packed up my bags, and I flew over with pretty much an open picture and not quite knowing where it's going to take me. Of course, I didn't know the man. Not knowing what I was going to see when I got there, but obviously many years later, I stayed with him, became his Uchi Deshi eventually, living in the dojo, training full-time, and until early 1990s, 1993, when that part of the journey came to an end and I returned to England, and soon after started teaching here in London. And apart from a sabbatical for personal reasons, a lot to do with family, I returned to teaching about 20 years ago now, and I've been teaching since. And you, Cathy, and your friend have been my students in my sort of reincarnation, I guess. So that's a little bit about my background.
Fantastic, thank you very much for that. Okay, so fear. I wonder if the best way to approach this is for me to kind of explain how this idea came. I was talking to Fran about it, and Fran, you're also very interested in this topic, aren't you? For your for your own reasons as well. Over the last year or so, or the last couple of years, I've been very lucky in the sense that I've been able to. I've gone to various seminars and things, and visited different teachers, both here in the UK and in Europe and further overseas as well. And I've taken lessons from lots of different teachers. some of whom I've really liked very much. And the thing that occurred to me, the thing that I was thinking about recently is how, although despite when I've taken ukemi from some of these teachers, it's been far from easy. You, Sensei, remain the most difficult person I find to take ukemi from. And so, for example, I can think of a teacher who is very, very strong, very, very forceful, and it was difficult to take ukemi from him, but I did feel relatively well prepared for it. I felt I could handle. I mean, it was right on the limit of what I could handle because it was very strong, but I felt prepared for it. And the thing that struck me about it was that this teacher was very strong like this, but all the time. And so in a way, it kind of took away a little bit of the fear factor in that you kind of knew what to expect. You kind of, it came to a point where you sort of thought, okay, well, I have to take ukemi. I know I'm going to have to take ukemi in this way. And so, as I say, it kind of took away the fear factor. And for me, I don't know if you'll agree, Fran, but I feel that with you as a teacher, perhaps the fact that you're never set, you're never fixed in the same, in the sense that sometimes you'll go very strong, sometimes you'll go soft, sometimes you'll go slow, sometimes you'll go fast, sometimes you'll just change the technique in the middle of it. We're never kind of comfortable. We can't get comfortable. And in a way, I don't know what you think, Fran, but in a way, it's scarier. And so, I mean, I don't know if it's so much a question, but I just wanted to kind of share my feeling on it, and just sort of invite you to comment. Really, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
I just wanted to add one thing. I actually the concept that comes up to my mind rather than fear is uncertainty and how to deal with uncertainty. But now that we've framed this as fear, it makes sense to me in the sense of also the pleasurable side that fear can have. So you are there exposing yourself, and it's funnier when there's this uncertainty that in other aspects of life it's problematic, but when training is cool. So yeah, just wanted to add that before hearing from you, Sensei.
Wow, there's a lot there. Before I kick in, well, I am kicking in. Cathy, your observation, I think, where power or strength does not conflate with uncertainty and fear, and that's an interesting observation because going many years back, that transition from my last days in England, before meeting up with Chiba Sensei in his dojo, something was happening where I was beginning to make distinctions between certain kinds of training, and the thing that became the most obvious was that some people who threw with a lot of power, in many ways with more power than Chiba Sensei and then Shibata Sensei, who I met later on. And that's saying something. I mean, these guys probably weren't using anywhere near as much power as they could. They didn't need to at all times. But what it was that one was a knowable quality and the other one wasn't. And if I had to pick the words, unknowable seems to be the best one. One was there was no challenge in the sense of where you're going and what you're doing. The challenge was, of course, that they're strong and you're going to land hard and you've got to learn how to deal with that side of things to protect yourself. But when it came to Chiba Sensei, there was this I think one of the guys that was there when I arrived described him as when you grabbed his wrist, forget about kicking and punching and all that type of stuff. Just grabbing his wrist, you could feel like an electricity cable. I mean, and it really was. You grabbed it, and this thing charged through his body. Someone said it's like a boa constrictor. It's like flexible and alive, and which means you don't know what it's going to do. And what it is you felt a weapon. And not a knife, not a gun, not a sword, but the human being itself. And when you do karate, for example, or boxing, that the fact that you've got these fists, then it's a weapon. But in Aikido, it's not always so obvious. And just the grabbing of him, and that had such a big impact on me. And I suppose over the years, as I said, I got close and trained very deeply with him. Part of that became me. I took that side of him, probably because part of the personality overlaps with that. Not everyone takes that away with them, but some people have. Some of my old colleagues and people I've known in the past have taken that with them, and it's a quality that I suppose the word like is not doesn't. It seems to diminish what it is. It's just a significant part of what it is. It gives life to much of what is being taught, and in the end, we use these words Budo and martial art, and I've never heard of a Budo where fear is not addressed in some capacity. The degree of it is the question, I suppose, but the actual presence of it, I think, is critical for many reasons. It's not. We're not talking about. Certainly, I'm not talking about fighting or combat, although that would be a factor as well. But it's all sorts of things that dredge up in these situations, and I suppose I do that, and it's something that I've stuck to. I don't think I can be otherwise at this stage in my life. It's the shape and direction I've taken.
Was it a conscious? So you said it was kind of partly your personality overlapped with it as well. Did you also recognise that it was an important teaching tool? Without words,
yeah. A lot of decisions, a lot of changes, a lot of the evolution. They take time. You got to really. We had your party the other day, and Luis came over, one of my other students, and Luis was asking me about my early days in San Diego, and I was talking about the sort of the free California life, and maybe there's a twinge of envy that I should have chosen that life, and he just giggled away for a couple of reasons. One is like, I don't think so. I think you knew what you wanted, and I think you chose very clearly, and you had so much on your plate that even if you entertained just shooting off and enjoying. I mean, I did go off, but not in any sort of frivolous kind of way. I had too much exhaustion, mental occupation, dedication, all of it, and I had a life there that meant I had no time for anything else. And in conjunction with that, and those who got to know me, the American friends I had at the time, they also giggled that you'd last 2 weeks. Okay, we'll give you 2 months. In other words, it's like maybe you'll drift away and then you'll come back because you've already made up your mind, and you'll get bored with the Southern California lifestyle. And and I think they were correct. I think I knew myself well enough that okay, this is tough, and it's going to take a while. And you've got to deal with it class to class, day to day, week to week, month to month, until you knew what until was when until came.
And was every kind of interaction with Chiba Sensei unpredictable? Did it always have that kind of that fear factor?
Yes, but not in the way you would think. I mean, first of all, it was the nature of the beast, to put it politely. He was a formidable man. He was a dangerous man, and that's I would say that's a credit to him. I mean, if you look at the era, you look at the personality,
Mm-hmm.
you look up his own proximity to the founder, to Ueshiba, and his immediate seniors, and the era that it came from. I would have been surprised if he wasn't. But it was also, and this is really important, that's where the creative drive came from, and you can't separate the two. And his genius was being able to utilize that. So, coming back to your question, was every class super dangerous and hell on earth and a war zone? No, far from it. None of us would have made it, and it's not always creative and suitable to be that way. And it also depended on who was there. But he could switch on a dime, as the Americans would say. He could turn on a penny, and the moment he turned, you saw the other side, the fire of brimstone. I'll be rude, or the piss and vinegar, as some people have said.
And so when you say that not every lesson was like that, the kind of like, full on scary, I guess. It reminded me of someone that came to visit the dojo, I think to try out recently. And he was very kind of easygoing and kind of smiley, and I was working with him. I was helping him because it was his first class. And then you came over and you started working with him, and you were being very, very nice to him. Not saying that you're not normally nice, but you were particularly you were being very, very nice to him and very helping him a lot. And what was interesting was when he went away, and his demeanor didn't change, but when he went and we continued training, his body had completely changed. And I thought, oh, something's got in here. And I was like, is it fear? Was he afraid? He didn't express it verbally or on his face, but I felt it. He became much more tense. And so I wonder if it doesn't have to be strong and
No.
What's the word for it to be frightening? I mean, I don't know what you think, Fran. If you've got any thoughts on that at all.
I think that it's maybe the level of demand that he felt that he had to respond to increased, because same happened to me yesterday, for example, with another person. I was also helping him, and I was helping him a lot, and he was very light, so I could even correct his hip pulling from the belt. And then he saw how others took ukemi, and because most of us had hakamas that day, he was looking at the techniques and then looking back at me and like, is this serious? Am I going to do this one day? So I think that, and in the example that you say, I think that the person experienced this increased level of demand. So there's this extra tension, and we've mentioned this before in other episodes, that from what you're thinking flows to your body. So I suppose it's related to that.
I think you may be right. I think both of you. I think, I mean, to make any headway in training, there's got to be a degree of openness, and I think if there's a demand in the way that you've described, and you have to open up to it, or you sense you've got to open up, that scares some people. Things will go in, and you'll pick up on the energy of the people around you, and maybe you can sense that where a little inclination of where this may go, and that may be frightening. I don't know is the honest answer, but I can give you a story which is really revealing. This is sort of a couple of years after I was in California. There was quite a few people, from all over the world would arrive. It was quite extraordinary, really, all over the US, which you would expect from around the world, like myself. Some made it, some didn't. Some stayed for a while. Their careers, their lives. Obviously, your priorities take over again. But they spent whatever time they could there. And there was a young man who came from the East Coast of the United States, the New England area, and he was fantastic to train with. He had youth, he had athleticism, bubbling, fizzing energy, and Chiba Sensei absolutely loved working with him. He just could not leave his hands off of him. So there used to be these stairs with the University Avenue dojo. You'd walk down, and as soon as you saw him, he'd just gravitate towards him, even without the session beginning, just play around. It was basically a line cup with the line situation. It was fabulous to watch. The young man could more than handle it. He was very good, but he didn't stay. And pardon me. And the reason is that is the fear factor. And so the physically was capable of handling it, but with Chiba Sensei, the question of fear is going to come in. And the young man, he was very honest about it. He said every time he walks down those stairs with the expectation of a class, what's going to come next, and you didn't know what's the mood going to be, what is he going to do. But even before that, actually, I'm scared. He's scary, and I don't think you should be scared in Aikido. So maybe he had a bit of that.
He said that. I don't think you should be scared in Aikido.
Yes, Aikido is love and joy and pleasure, and that's a school of thinking that we've all heard of. But I would not agree with the young man. I could understand him not liking being scared, but fear. I mean, fear is such a natural part of our existence, and without it, we're sort of flat and dull and dead, and nothing happens. I mean, I'm talking about as human beings rather than as martial artists. It's just such a visceral, natural part of who we are, and so many in our. I mean, some say that we live in a very anesthetic lifestyle. Many people are walking, sleeping, dull. That there's danger around the corner. You could get run over. You could get mugged because you're wearing headphones or listening to music as you're walking along. Because society, by and large, is safe. But Budo was never developed out of that. And the founder of Aikido was very much of the warrior inclination, a very significant warrior at that, and that's a part of what's moved on. But to make it broader and accessible, that part has been significantly diminished. And I suppose the young man, I wouldn't be surprised if it's, and I don't mean this judgmentally, but hippie, new age culture merging with modern, taking Eastern ideas, merging. It's not unusual. And can you judge in the sense of, I like the movement, I love the energy, I love the physical contact, but I don't want it to be scary. And he made the right decision.
Cherry picking, perhaps.
I did not know him well enough for that. So it could be you're completely right, that it's a little spoiled, a little spoiled, picking the bits and pieces that you want rather than seeing and taking it for what it is. And Chiba Sensei being an example of someone who's quite orthodox in that respect. But I didn't know the guy well enough that maybe he was genuine, that not cherry picking at all. I think this is how it should be. But I would say he was wrong. From my own perspective, he's wrong. I think that's not what Aikido is. And so if he doesn't think that's what it is, then he did the right thing. And, but that's a really good example of it.
So I've got so many questions in my head. I'm struggling to think which one to ask you next. So I suppose perhaps what you're saying is that fear is part of it, but it's also necessary. And then does there come a point? Is there a limit? Is there a point where fear is helpful and fear is necessary up to a point? And then is there a point where it's too much, or is it just relative, depending on the person? Do you have to judge how? I suppose you have to judge how far to take things with somebody, but yeah, I guess that's my question, is where is the line between it being helpful and unhelpful?
Well, that line moves, as you probably realize by now. But I would say, in a general class, it depends on who's there. Also depends on the mood, in a sense that I'm in, and then the class sometimes works itself out. Usually, they do. You lift it to where the people can handle it. Too much, certainly. When too much fear. Two things: oppression and terror. If someone is terrified, they can't function, and that leads to oppression. You're trying to press someone down. If it's because it becomes a very negative value, because there's a sense that fear is negative. But the trick is that you want people to rise above that fear to be able to deal with it. And I suppose, if you take the word martial and then you extrapolate to military and you think of the army, in the army, they train these soldiers, and I saw plenty of those. I saw Marines in California. All the bases were there, and those lads who ended up going off to war. I mean, they had to deal with something that most of us will never know. That kind of scenario, but they're trained to be able to function, because it's unpredictable, it's chaotic. It's life and death, and if you seize up and freeze, you can't function as a soldier. So even within a formalized training like that, they have to know when to leave it and when to, how far to take it, and those individuals who excel in those situations and they move on and become whatever they become within the army, get promoted or serve in different units. But coming back to us, and we're not in the military, but there is the martial element there. Yes, how do you utilize it as a positive force, and you just dish it out? And it's are you trying to destroy someone? Certainly not. Clearly not. But does there have to be a factor where it has to bite? You've heard me say this. It has to bite. It has to feel like it's going to go somewhere, and it gives you the slight jitters, I suppose. And I think it also gives it the excitement. There's no getting around that. It's like a sophisticated roller coaster ride, maybe, where people, well, they're not going to put the brakes on something. You're going to fly off the chair and land 200 meters across the funfair and break your neck. No, that's not what they're going to do. And yet, all that twirling, all that falling, does certainly get the adrenaline going. And in Aikido, I mean, I don't want to compare it to a fairground, but there is a roller coaster element to it, and you're drawn in. And
adrenaline.
Yeah, and I think it's good stuff. And
And Fran, you actually touched on that a little bit in the previous in a previous episode. I can't remember which one, but you spoke a little bit about. I think we were talking about. Was it injury? I think injury came into it.
Yes, yeah, I think it's very easy to link fear with injury, because for example, in my case, it took me, I did my physio, I did all my exercises, and I took the time to prepare to go back.
After your injury?
After my injury, exactly, so that I wasn't scared when training. I tried to get to a point where I felt confident that I could handle this uncertainty. And then, of course, I knew that there was going to be painful sometimes, but I also knew that my threshold was in a safe band. Something that's interesting when gauging when training with other people is, for example, Sensei, something you do and you did when I just came back from the injury, is taking the time to feel how the person is moving, and sometimes even asking, like, is this okay? Is this, and even if it's a rhetoric question and you're going to continue, it gives the time to breathe and say, okay, this person is taking me into consideration, and we continue training, and so on. Please.
That's
Yeah, I
interesting.
remember as. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sensei.
Are you sure? If you
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to.
No, go ahead.
It's. I had a little thought about our podcast, and one of the things regarding fear is, even as a passive person sitting watching something going on, a class, with the knowledge that you may be called up at any moment, and how the mind is affected by fear, what it sees, what it thinks it sees, what they think is actually going on versus what is actually going on. And it's a very almost like a sports psychology sort of arena. There's a lot going on, and some people are very noisy in their head. It goes beyond their head, in their demeanor, in their body. And there's a lot of something else is there. That's their life. That's their life as a whole, and not necessarily the training. And some people, when they train, even if they're noisy elsewhere, maybe they've got the ability or the talent where it crystallizes. Things clear. It goes quiet, and things just take place in the correct sense, in the correct manner in training. They seem to see and feel and behave correctly. And others who are very maybe clear in the bigger world come and they're the opposite. Suddenly it becomes chaotic because this is a new territory and they don't know how to operate in this arena.
It manifests differently for different people.
Yes, as a rule, it does. But as a rule, I would say if you're noisy out there, you're noisy in the classroom, because the dojo, I've often said, is a microcosm of outside. You're not a different person. You're not a different thing. So unless you treat Aikido as a kind of escape where you're getting away from whatever you are out there and becoming something else, but that doesn't make any sense, because even the most keen person training, the number of hours that they put in does not compare with the number of hours you devote outside of training, even if you do think about it a lot. So a lot of what else is going on in your daily life is you bring that into your class in the way you are. And all of us, there's no one escapes that. So you turn up, and then you got to switch on to the demands of training. So that hence my big deal about timekeeping and protocol and allowing the culture shift to a training environment until that part of you is so wired in that it switches. Probably begins to switch as you get on the bus or on the train. On the way to class.
Timekeeping in the sense that. Timekeeping in the sense that you have time to get to the dojo and adjust to being there.
To being there and the demands of the class, which could be a scary class, could be a mellow class, could be a soft class. You've got to be ready for what's there.
Could be both.
But back to the injury part, I mean, that's a factor, isn't it? I mean, joint moves, throws, projections, locks. And what are we looking for? Very gentle ones, or ones that feel, gosh, this can really work, and that then I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how to move with this, and then the fear of your elbow getting injured, your wrists getting injured, falling on your neck, on your shoulder, and I mean, I've had my fair share of of injuries, and there's I suppose that's. How shall I address that? How we deal with it, which is coming to you, Fran. Was it last year? That last summer, wasn't it? And then it was pretty self-evident that when that happened, the question, which probably everybody had, I certainly did, is let's see how she deals with this. It's a natural question. I'm sure you had that question in your own mind that okay, damn with this stuff, is not worth my time or my body, or it's a natural reaction, or no, you get angry. I'm not going to be beaten by this, and something comes up. What that is unique to most people, but there are a few predictable ones. And you come back, an injury, I mean, Chiba Sensei spoke about this quite often. Injury can teach us sometimes a lot more than not being injured. We start moving differently. There's a consciousness that is there. Sadly, there's a lot of truth to it. A lot of people don't realize how close they are to injury or damage. And so that part, I would say, is the conscious and subconscious fear. The ones that you're immediately aware of what can happen, and you're scared and you don't even know why. You know, that's a deeper rooted one, and that's to do with probably the unknown. It brings up something else that is not necessarily to do with getting thrown around or locked, or being locked or pinned or anything like that, but you're dealing with a person maybe scares you a little bit, and that brings up unconscious fear, and that could be triggered. You know, sometimes when I'm out, so you pick up a vibe that you probably learned from while you were training, and you recognize something that is a very useful thing to recognize. It's like, don't go that way, you know, go that way if you have a choice, and so a very positive realization of why this energy has been put in us. No fear, by the way, is an awful quality. You know, they say fear, you know, fear, and then ride over it is rise up to it and do it anyway. I would say is the more important one. If you have no fear, there's no vitality. I would say.
And Fran, do you feel in some ways, do you feel less fearful since coming back from your injury?
No. No. Fearful, not because of the shoulder, really. Fearful because of the baseline fear that exists when training. Yeah.
That's it. That's interesting because I know, Cathy, that you practice Zen meditation, and I remember people asking when I was sort of deeply involved with it, does the pain ever go away? So does the fear ever go away? And the pain never goes away. Is that the sirens? Shall we let it go?
London, we can't get away from it in London, can we?
Like our classes, but anyway, the pain doesn't go away. It sort of becomes this background thing that's ever present, and you live with it. It's part of the process because of the demands of meditation, and it's like in Aikido. Do you stop aching? Do you stop? The knees. Olia, who visited us after quite a break, she said for a couple of days now her knees have been sore. But if she was regular, they don't stop being sore; they're just less sore. I'm not selling Aikido very well here by talking about this. But you know, it's like a runner. They ache. You know, their spines, the lower back, the knees, the neck, depending on how limber they are. It never goes away, and so. Yeah. And so fear, I can leave you with this, and I think I've quoted this in a previous podcast. I'm not sure. It's probably one of my own. And it's to do with the actor Ian McKellen. We all know him from mainly most people from Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings series. And he was asked, because he's not a spring chicken, he's an older man, and he was asked, when you go to theatre, not so much cinema, but when you go to theatre and you go to perform, do you still get butterflies? Are you still nervous? Do you still get scared? And his answer was fantastic. He said, yes. And he said, and I would say that when the day comes when when that doesn't happen, that's probably the day you should stop theatre, because the audience can tell that that's your life force as well. They're so closely intrinsically connected. But
the fire's gone out.
Yeah, your fire's gone. So it's the discipline. It's the discipline of it. How you use it, how you utilize it, how you make it into something that serves you and develops your art, sharpens you, wakes you, moves you, shifts you, and gets the mind to be more lucid and clear. It's so much going on, and a lot of it is in the psychological realm, and again back to Eastern thinking, the mind, the body, you don't separate it, because the nervousness here ends up in nervousness in the body.
Yeah, I like that story about Ian McKellen. It kind of resonates with me as well. Also being a musician, a performer. Yeah. But what's interesting is that Fran, when I asked you that, you said I guess I was expecting you to say that you weren't as scared anymore. I don't know why, but I guess the reason why I was thinking that you would say you weren't as scared is because you do seem different. I think you seem different now compared to before. So maybe that's just it. The fear hasn't gone away, but somehow your response to it is perhaps changing.
I think I meant that I'm not scared specifically of the injury, and recovering from an injury and going back to training. I feel that I feel more. I don't know how to say it, but again, as I said before, that I could handle the fear, but it's a bit a paradox, because if you feel that you can handle it, then are you really scared or not? That's I was thinking about that, but the fear factor didn't go, like the baseline bit of Aikido, but I stopped thinking about the shoulder all the time. The first classes, of course, I was like very, very, very careful, but then it was like, oh, I can move, I can adapt, I know when to tap. I identified the different time that the shoulder has now, basically. So yeah, that's what I meant, rather than yeah.
I think there's this could be Daisetsu Suzuki, the Zen master. He was very well known in the 60s and 70s, and I think his book on Zen and Japanese culture, how it influences traditional Japan. But he addressed fear in the conscious fear, the fear of death, which is such a key factor, I suppose, a component in Buddhism, in Budo, and it's I think Kevin Costner used it in The Bodyguard, didn't he? Like when the girl was saying, "Oh, so you mean he's not scared, so he's going to die," something like that. Whitney Houston, and he said, "No, you lose the conscious fear of death. That is, it's not that you're not scared of dying, but because if you're too speculative, the too much of it, when something becomes an obstacle, that you can't function." And we needn't go to extreme stuff here, that you can't function, versus learning how to deal with something as you have, Fran, which I agree with Cathy, by the way. The change is very significant and very positive. I don't know if it's embracement or something opened or something shifted. I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. It's what everyone is sensing and picking up on that is important. But it's freed you up, and it's quite incredible. It's freed you up. It's all sort of locked up, and in the movie, yes, it's entertainment, but there's a lot of truth to it. You learn. If you're too scared, it's very difficult to function, and we all freeze. And it needn't be Aikido or martial art. We all freeze. We all sit on a fence, unless you're the crazy type that charges in to things for better or for worse, which is not necessarily a smart thing to do, unless you have to, I guess. But I truly believe in that there is. It's not the denial of fear; it's the how you live with it, how do you deal with it, and that frees you up. I was just thinking, Olya arriving the other day, and Rodrigo, this little darling, this little baby. Pauline has just had a little baby. I know Luis has got a couple of kids. And I'm not a parent, but it's so self-evident. There's another fear there, that leaving these children alone, the things that can happen in the world, and do you let that freeze you as a parent, where you can't function, and it becomes an obstacle for the child, because you're passing some of that fear, and they're even terrified to be able to live a decent life? Or do you you keep that to yourself? You let them live their lives, you let them do their thing, and it's just, the fear hasn't gone, though. It's still the possibility of things happening is for all of us, not just children, is ever present. And back to the anesthetic. The anesthetic is because people don't like being scared. They want to be comfortable. They want to be assured or secure certain, and I don't believe that exists. I mean, was it last week? The earthquake with no signs. I felt earthquakes when I was in California. I imagine you have as well, Fran, in Chile. And when they go, humbling is the only word I can think of. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, and you there's nothing you can do. It takes over, and then you just hope that it's going to stop and the ground beneath you doesn't open up. And now we live in a country that isn't like that. We're better off than most in that respect, but it is a factor. And I think when people seek to comfort themselves completely, I mean, to escape that side of things, and I'm not talking about the extremes of nature that way, but just the day-to-day stuff, then I think you stifle yourself and which also stifles your creative potential, not just in Aikido, but in whatever you do. Scared to take the steps, they're scared to let go of certain things. I hope I'm not deviating, but I do believe it is a factor in all things.
So when you said just touching on...
You've been listening to My Perspective, where women talk Budo.